the Cyber Insurance News Podcast. I'm your host, Martin, and we're at the Scout InsurTech conference in Columbus, Ohio, which is being held today at the home of the Columbus Crew, the Scott's Miracle Grow Field. Today, the topic on hand is, the authorization of cyber insurance in the age of agentic AI. Joining me, starting at the end, is Julia Garcia Tremblay. She leads U.S. and Canada for CertEdge, sits at the intersection of control verification and underwriting competence. Julia's question is never whether a control exists, it's whether it works. Next to her, Jeremy Epstein, CEO of Mayflower Specialty. Jeremy prices the risk everyone else is still trying to name. After him is Rich Gatz, head of cyber claims at Arc Insurance. Rich doesn't price risk, he pays for it, or does it. Next and last, Tristan Morris, CEO of Split Secure, building the control layer between delegated authority and lateral execution. Tristan's thesis is that a threat isn't the attacker, it's the permission. So I want to start with the name of this panel, and just starting at the end, Julia, what springs to mind when you hear it? The authorization gap, cyber insurance, and age of agentic AI. What comes to mind?
Yeah, so good AI governance, certification, it's only as good as the controls that you implement. And it's really tricky with agentic AI, just AI in general, because there's no one size fits all. And so there's a lot of space to navigate and get things blocked. Those are the name of the
Yeah, look, I totally agree. I think there is a lot to be said about not necessarily what AI can do, but all the things that you didn't stop it from doing as in terms of controls across your organization. So that's exactly what you want to focus on.
Rich?
Yeah, I mean, I think I come at it from a little bit differently, just from a carrier perspective. I think there's a lot of unknown quantity in regards to cyber insurance and AI, but something that I think market leading carriers do have is kind of a base level coverage, foundational level coverage that specifically in regards to network security breaches or data privacy breaches, AI is typically already covered. So we've seen some requests for, brokers to specifically add AI coverage. Like generally the Mon 1 cyber policy already includes that. Doesn't matter how you get breached, you just see your friction.
The most effective controls on AI aren't on the AI itself, they're on the systems around the AI. That makes the threat both easier to understand with traditional methods, and it makes it easier to capture in policy language.
Great, thank you. So I am a journalist, which means that I tend to know things. And one of the things I know after 30 plus years of doing this is that sometimes people put phrases and ideas and words around and people nod knowingly. And even in a room full of experts, sometimes that knowledge gap exists. So Tristan, agentic AI for the room, let's set the baseline. What does that mean?
It's a computer system that is capable of taking action without a human intermediary. So it's an AI model that in response to an instruction could call APIs, execute code, interact with other systems at the company, take actions inside tools, etc. If it tells a human to do something, it's probably not agentic AI. If it can do that thing itself, it is.
Anyone else need to add any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to add, that sounds maybe a little bit scary, sounds a little Terminator, but think about like cruise control in a movie. It's controlling the actuation without your information. There's still a human in the loop to some degree, but it's automating some of that task.
So Tristan, and Jeremy, there's this idea of a classification problem, not just a problem. What would you correct about the classification action bar for underwriter?
Go ahead, Jim. Yes. So it starts with what does the model actually consist of? So let me give an example. Many people here will probably be familiar with the Striker breach. Attackers were able to, long story short, brick most of the devices in the company, about $6 billion damages. So imagine you gave an AI model access to the administrator account for the company device manager, so it's capable of wiping all of the devices. You would say the risk in that situation doesn't come from the AI model. It comes from the fact that you've put a system whose behavior is not fully controllable in charge of something that's extremely sensitive. The access of the power for unilateral action is actually the problem. So I think the best way to classify risk in relation to AI is what actions can the AI take without human oversight that are potentially damaging or could lead to some sort of loss.
Jeremy, you have to add to that.
Yeah, I think, look, there's kind of two buckets that I would place carriers in right now in regards to AI across coverages. And that, leads into whether it's general liability that we're now seeing exclusions, errors and omissions, directors and officers are going around business liability beyond cyber. There's a bucket of carriers that are basically saying, kind of what we heard on this panel already, is like, I think this is something that's in there and that's just baked into those coverages. And there's another host of carriers that are just saying, actually, this should be a prohibited class of coverage, and we should just exclude this. And we don't really understand what we're properly pricing for. And so I think as the market evolves to really understand, okay, to the earlier conversation of what degree these tools have access to and what they can do, really, I think that is going to profoundly impact coverage and also redefine what we're doing, which is really great kind of affirmative language, because, in absence of that, there is really this kind of silent, ambiguous problem that most carriers in the industry don't really understand, the basic protocols or collect information on this tools yet.
So Tristan, if you're going to redesign the application process for, I guess this is still cyber insurance, so no AI, strictly insurance, I suppose. How do you start? What questions do you, if you remake it, what do you do?
That is a very broad question. But
I tell you what, pick two things.
Okay, two things. So first, in the vein of controls, move from the negative to the positive. So in a cyber insurance application today, a lot of the questions will be after bad things. Do you use MFA? Because not using MFA is bad. Do you train employees on proper security practices? Because not doing so is bad. Shifting that to a positive, we have certain control frameworks that if you follow them, that allows us to have a certain understanding of risk. That's what positively seeking these good practices. An example of good practices in the context of AI, this is something is understanding clearly what permissions does this model have under a worst case scenario. If the model vividly hallucinates, or if an employee types delete the company as a joke and then accidentally hits enter, what is the maximum amount of damage this model can do? As a very simple way of, again, understanding the risk and being able to meaningfully capture it.
So, Rich, you've been involved in building new technologies and dealing with the issues they create, the good and the bad, and mostly, I guess, the bad. What do you look for in this situation? What sort of things you?
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe I'm a little bit weird, but I think that in cyber insurance is an interesting space. So we've been dealing with a soft market for a long time. And for those that don't know what a soft market is, essentially means that you're finding expanding coverage and decreasing premium. So when COVID happened, it was 21 and 22, saw about a 300% increase in cyber insurance premiums. And we're still above that today, what we were pre-COVID. But we've seen kind of a general decline in cyber insurance premiums since. So there's been kind of this, I don't want to call it race to the bottom, but a lot of companies offering a lot of very expansive coverage for a lot of low premium to be marketable in this space. Right. And so I think that, because of that, cyber insurance is generally very broad. It's like I said before, you have two triggers on a normal cyber policy for first party and third party coverage. There's others, but we can go into that later. But network security breach, your data privacy. And so, unlike commercial general liability or whatever, you have like specific covered perils. It essentially is just determining what a trigger is for that breach. And so, if Shiny Hunters uses Agentic AI to breach Striker or whoever, doesn't matter. And, generally in the marketplace, we're not seeing AI exclusions in cyber. We're monitoring it very closely, but it's one of those things where, these threat actors are super sophisticated.
Yeah.
And so, whether or not they're using homegrown Google Cloud consultants, that they found in the dark web, or they're using Agentic AI to breach you in org, the results kind of the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think, as we think about the level of which these tools will now be used in the future, I think we're obviously in early innings, and just the capital structure of some of these massive public companies we've seen invest into, the deployment of these tools, it begets more higher level of usage of the tools across organizations. So I think we're just starting to see that now, and the ramifications of that I think don't necessarily fit into just more breaches or more, potential ransomware. It really is your potential for drift, the performance levels, your potential for errors and omissions, your potential for, effectively, non-human level output across the organization because they're not deterministic. And so that's really where I think this starts to bleed into some of the other coverage parts. And I think actually cyber insurance probably isn't the right one for these coverages. I think it really is some of the other ones I talked about, and that's what you said.
Julia, I know that not necessarily your bailiwick, but do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, maybe if I can recenter some of this AI discussion. And I mean, I think sometimes we talk about cyber risks synonymously with AI risks, and I think in some ways they are exactly the same in terms of vulnerabilities, configuring the network, infrastructural vulnerabilities, and I think all that AI is just another tool for cybersecurity risk. That's it. It just expands the risk access to the company, to your platforms, to data. However, it's able to access you in your company. So just kind of demystifying the way that AI opens the door for risk.
I think that's a really good point. And it made me think too. So because of that kind of race to the bottom, like cyber insurance, you often have other coverages bound with it. Multimedia liability is one, but also technology D&O is another. And so I think kind of along your remarks, technology, coverages are going to be very much implicated because if you have an issue with the technology product or a technology service, you now have a trigger under that policy. Right. And so you get into a little gray area when it's like, all right, well, if we're using HMT or Claude or whatever, is that our technology service, our technology product, even if it's the foundational basis of our entire organization, then that's where I think.
I mean, you make a great point about cyber in general. And I think coming to this from the outside as a journalist, one of the things about it is because of the way it's being, depending on how you look at it, foisted upon or embraced by our culture and our economy. It now is it's in every space, and it's sort of like having email. Right? It doesn't matter what you do, you're online, which creates the risk that is now threats and fires. So the word control has been used a couple of times, and I wonder whether or not, starting with you, Rich, you might tell me what does that matter? How does it look like in the claims situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, so it's really more of an underwriting question than a claim situation, just because claims by very necessity has to be reactive, right? So we look at the insurer agreements, the policy to see if the claim has been triggered. And if it has, then you provide the coverage available as long as there's an exclusionary language that might be available. But from an underwriting perspective, and I've worked very closely with a lot of amazing underwriters, controls is really, okay, how good of a risk is this? What do they have in place? Whether it's a platform, process, or person to help them safeguard it, right? And so when I think of controls, it's what are you doing to make sure you're safe? Because as defenders, we need to be perfect. As attackers, you just need to be lucky. And so you can have the best controls. You do everything the right way, and you'd have, CrowdStrike Falcon on every endpoint, and someone's still going to respond to an SMS text from someone in India. You give them their
Interesting. The metaphor that I find helpful here is imagine if you have an intern. Maybe they're a clever intern, but they're not really reliable. They're not this fully who should necessarily be trusted with critical tasks. If you give that intern administrator access to a critical system or another sensitive permission, and they, in an attempt to get spearphished and then allow an attacker in, that was on you for giving an employee who wasn't trustworthy access.
And I totally have never had the exact same scenario happen. Never happened. It's definitely not multiple times.
Yes. But this is it exactly. Controls doesn't mean inventing some new framework for AI. It's taking the same framework that we use for humans. For saying like untrusted employees should not have unrestricted access to certain systems, and applying that to AI. The agent should not have unrestricted access to certain things, but this is inherent ingredient to all of it.
Yeah, one of the boogeymen to your point earlier, Julia, is the idea that if these AIs are, to put it very simply, based on us, they're going to make the same mistakes we have made. And guardrails, if you will, the popular phrase is one that comes into play and needs to be maintained or thought about in a serious way. So with regard to certification, Julia, what does it mean to certify control action points? And does that hold when the controls need to govern by agent rather than?
Yeah, so I think the second point you made, that is that controls are just risk mitigation exercises. So you bound the system, and that's true for an intern. That's true for a system. And I think that's probably controls probably less effective in. And then there's the last thing called free will. What tools do not. They're task oriented. Sometimes the tasks are very expansive, but if the performance is based on our ability to design the system to do those things, and also restricted by us, and that's also only as good as the controls that we put in place. And again, that's from a process side. That's from like a user personnel side, training. Goes beyond just like actual system restriction, access, and so it's true for humans, it's true for computers, and then from a certification side, basically it's as simple as, does the control work? Can the system get access or go beyond the boundaries that what guardrails that you put in place? If the answer is yes, then the control does not work, then you wouldn't get the certification for that. So there is no non-zero risk. So a good AI governance approach is to minimize risk as low as reasonably possible. And so you account for some of these unforeseen situations, and that's where some of those processes come in, because you can mitigate some that does happen afterwards. But just verifying specific controls, it's pretty clear if it works or not. You can test against the system, and you develop test suites to test against those things.
So moving to the underwriting reality, Jeremy and Rich, you made reference to AI exclusions. Is that a problem to overcome so you don't leave that money out there and not flowing into your bottom line? Or is there
I mean, I think that the cyber insurance market generally wants to cover AI related risks, because if they don't have an actual affirmative coverage, like you can control F the policy through AI and it shows up, or at least you don't have broad triggers that would, like I was saying earlier, in a network security breach and data privacy, you're not going to solve all of them. So cyber insurance, I think, is very soft with AI. The companies that are using it, if you want coverage, you took the industry with it. And generally, I think they're finding that.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, I would again take a different tack than it sounds like the panel, but I think basically from my perspective, both the carriers that have now added affirmative grants, whether it's TV, Coalition, or some of the others in the AI liability space via AI phishing and ransomware, or the carriers that are also just like you asked earlier, maybe just not pricing for it or electing a commensurate premium. I think both of those are occurring right now. And I think, the reason we've seen it drop both MGAs like us and some large carriers enter this and more to come in meaningful ways is because it's not my opinion that this is a gap in coverage. It's some of the largest balance sheets in the industry, like Swiss Re and like Papers out, consistently highlighting that this is not something that fits within sort of just exposures and coverages that are out there today. And so I think like why we exist and why a lot of other 5 or 10 different MJs are in this market is because there's effectively a way to quantify what the risk is and create new coverage parts that really identify and expressly cover this exposure that is the non-deterministic nature of these tools that just really hasn't been seen in software previously. You type something into Excel, you're going to get the answer. But when you start to use these tools, you can't really rely on your professional service to oversee it. And so that's really a new exposure. And that is practically what we're talking about.
I think that, again, I've mentioned being an expert. Julia and I speaking beforehand, and there is something, I've been to a few of these tech now. There's something really interesting about the way insurance crosses and there's an energy here about the problem we've all touched on, particularly in cyber and now AI, that is kind of fun. people who aren't in insurance might feel silly, but there's a real enthusiasm about this. And I joke with Julia that a TV mid-O is called Studio. And there's a joke within it where a man turns to another, where a character turns to another and says, are you American or an Americans? And there is this idea here. And I wonder what you think about that idea that there is, like, it matters. Because every company, that certainly small companies, they're still realizing is affected by this reality. Everyone wants to embrace AI, from the CEO of a Fortune 10 company. And I wonder whether you have a thought about that sort of, I guess, more human part of it. Julia?
I do think
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, this is obviously the topic du jour, right? Every board meeting, they're getting, reactive conversations around, there's a huge incident increase, over 100%, flip of rise of AI incidents. There's a massive sweep of regulatory changes that are also happening here. And then the third is, it's kind of unclear where this sits in your current coverages. And so I think that's really what drives this conversation forward is, do you want to take some of that risk off the table when you might be spending meaningful percentage of your, annual budget on potentially token usage? That is a conversation worth having, I think. And when you have a, conversation around, okay, good fit here, it might have a, endorsement coverage here or a grant there. I think that's just not it's a tenuous position for either the board or the company itself. And so, yeah, I think that is a necessary conversation. And I think it's only going to continue to evolve. It's clearly heading based on spending in, the direction of more high level usage of these tools, which will just increase as it is. Yeah.
Julia?
Yeah. So, and I would just say there's a real ROI in AI use, whether you're using chatbots or building your own tools out there. I mean, there are serious benefits from that. And we are an innovation country. We want to enable technology. We want to be in the forefront of these technologies. And so I'm coming from an automotive autonomous driving background. There's this concept of acceptable risk. There is never zero risk. When you go out, drive your car, you accept the risk that you might get hit by another person. Your seatbelts have a failure rate associated with them. There's hardware components they fail. So there's never a non-zero risk. It's always about risk reduction and risk mitigation, as close to zero as possible, or whatever is acceptable in your industry. And so from like a cyber perspective, I think there is a similar concept there. It's all about mitigation. Risk reduction, the same thing. So, there's a Venn diagram between AI and the risk it introduces and cyber. There's some overlap, but AI tools, however you engage with them, whatever the tools are, it does introduce anomaly risk. But there are ways that you can safely and securely engage with them as reasonably as possible that you can get that ROI back. So I think everyone here wants to enable that, but just safely and securely.
Just one thing I would add, I think part of the reason that up to this point people have struggled a little bit with the concept of what is the appropriate level of risk for AI is that the question is not really well formed. Like, imagine you had an employee and you said, I want to insure against everything bad this employee could ever do. That would fall under multiple categories of insurance. They could steal from you, they could cause a fire, they could cause a cybersecurity incident, etc. Depending on how you deploy models, they could fall under any number of sources of risk, which make different notions of acceptables.
That's a very good point. I think one of the things when we think about computers, they work, right? When they don't work, you read about the video doesn't play right away and people give it about half a second, maybe even less. And there is this idea within technology that it has to be perfect and right all the time. Even if it's right less than humans, it seems to be unacceptable probably the population. Rich, you touched on the idea of this human part of this, the sophistication was moving to, when you look at the bad actors, when they're able to move as fast as they are with regard to, what's the phrase? Machine speed, I guess, would be what we'd say. What is that like for you when you think about the level that creates?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Like, it's really hard to tell. And there's been some industry reports out there that say that there's been like $1 billion in damages as a result of AI. There's no way to measure. Okay, like, unless you are a reporter that has insight to shiny hunters or some other threat actor group, which no one does. So if they did, you'd be on the front page of the New York Times. All right, we don't know exactly how they're using AI. We can only make some inferences. But I go back to, I think it was in an IBM study years and years ago. You might know better than me, but it was like a 1-10-60 rule. And it basically was like a state sponsored hacker can get access. You like, or as a defender, you need to recognize an intrusion within like a minute or 10 minutes. Right. And then you have, maybe it was like 10, 30, 60. You have 30 minutes to kick them out. And then 60 minutes is like whatever, because they found that state, nation, and threat actors, and this was 15 years ago, maybe, get access to any system they wanted to within 14 minutes. Okay. So what we found over the years is that what happened during COVID was there was just this proliferation of work from home where the controls were not as, and there's some search engines where you can look and see, hey, I want to know every endpoint that's connected to port 3830 on the interwebs. And there's a search engine that will pop it up. I've had some people at companies I worked at literally pulled up the control the control space for hydroelectric damage. All right. So it wasn't behind VPN, didn't require it. Right. So the point of the story though is to say that like, I get what you're saying from an underwriting perspective, but like in a lot of ways, AI has not changed the threat actor landscape in like a system compromise. What I've seen is an increase in social engineering because you no longer have a Nigerian prince with bad spelling and bad grammar. Okay. They're putting their things in whatever agentic AI model. They're creating something absolutely super sophisticated. They're telling the AI models to create an invoice for their business, put the domain name of the business in there, and it looks very professional. So we've seen this, increased sophistication and phishing. Now, admittedly, 60+% of all claims in the cyber insurance space, the initial indicator of compromise is sting. But you guys might have heard of like Mythos, other things like that. We don't have a way to tell that there's some hacker agentic AI that's being like, I want you to hack Scout Insurance. And then it spits out a bunch of stuff on our.
Jeremy? Yeah, I mean, I could add that, I think this is kind of a thing that we do hear often from the industry. And I'm not surprised to see the whole perception. And oftentimes in the cyber insurance realm, sort of the notion that we haven't seen the level of incidents. I think the same conversation, ironically, was happening around cyber 30 years ago. And so there's sort of the same conversation of there isn't this level of incident history. Why does this need to have its own standalone policy? Why can't this just be part of general liability or property insurance? And I think it's apt because it's actually very analogous to what AI risk is happening today, and honestly, the wrong conversations that are being had by the industry. So I think from our angle, we're trying to educate a market and brokers, and through the program we're in right now with Accenture and the partnership fund in New York called the FinTech Innovation Hub, we're actually working with a lot of large insurance and financial institutions are into this. And I can tell you that they are changing and figuring out how to adapt their own underwriting processes. So I think that is, it's no longer a hypothetical of whether or not this can, continue to exist without proper handling. I think, the level of scrutiny that large carriers are now taking into this space and tweaking and adjusting coverages, it just speaks to the fact that there are massive incidents and they're not public information yet.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to respect on that just a little bit. Very respectful. I get what you're saying.
Disrespect.
That'd be wild if I said that. Disrespectful. No.
Mostly respectful. Yeah,
might increase the views on the podcast. But no, I mean, I think, I've read the Coalition Claims report and, just based upon our data and marketplace data and talking to a lot of my peers in the industry, we don't know how much of AI is in that. And that's why the cyber insurance policies are as broad as they are. I can't speak to CGL or BOP policies outside of the fact that a lot of the brokers in my space say, if you want cyber coverage, you don't want addendum on a BOP, right? You want monoline cyber, depending upon the size of your org, it can be pretty cheap, right? And then you get a full stack insurance policy that can help you with everything. And so, we're not seeing it. And I mean, I insure Fortune 100, Fortune 50 companies. So have a lot of insight into that. I definitely think it's a concern. I think it's something we need to watch, but it's also why I'm a huge supporter of keeping cyber insurance policies very broad, so that if you do have a peril that triggers a network security breach or a data privacy breach, it should be covered regardless of what that peril is. But if you have those two foundation triggers in your insurance agreement, then there should be coverage.
Tristan, can you now?
There's a quote from, I won't name the company, but the CEO of an insurance company you've probably heard of, who said, if human error was grounds not to pay out a cyber policy, I would never actually pay.
90+% of all cyber claims are a direct proximate result of.
Yes. It's like if you're imagining a hack as like Mission Impossible or a state-sponsored actor deploying it, that basically never happens. Nearly all actual breaches are human error, which the attacker discovers, and then they exploit that to get it. So I would say probably the biggest, again, I agree that we don't know, but what I guess is going to be the biggest impact of AI is just scanning for violations of policy, weak controls, inappropriately enforced procedures, and allowing the attacker to take advantage.
So we see that in the unlawful collection space, right? Like, if you guys don't know, there's a couple of laws, primarily SIPA in California, which was, I think it's created in like 1968 to be against the law for wiretapping, right? Computers weren't really a thing back then. They literally meant wiretapping in your phone lines. But it does come with a $5,000 penalty per person. And so there's been this absolute ubiquitous move to file class actions for any company that uses cookies, Metapixel, TikTok cookie, things like that on their website. So there are plaintiff law firms that literally use AI to control the entire internet to say, what cookies are you using? Do you have opt-out or opt-in, requirements for your website? And then they send boilerplate letters to companies saying, oh, you had 30,000 views to your website. Well, 30,000 times $5,000 is a lot of money. You should pay us free.
Yeah, I've been on some of those legal panels, and they are quite excited about the situation they find themselves.
I bet they are.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just as bad as the threat actors, though, man.
I will just say, though, to quickly finish the point, if the point of this is, while AI may make it easier for the attackers to scale certain types of attacks or find certain types of vulnerability, if you have effectively enforced controls and a system that limits your risk exposure, there is only so much the attackers can do, even if they are using.
Fair point.
So I guess moving back to as we sort of to the close, and I'll put this to all of it. When you see, what would you like to see before you price a? Julia, what do you think needs to be sort of the
Top of the conversation when you're looking at this?
Yeah. So from our perspective, from an auditor, from a certifier, and an assessor, we suggest always starting with your risk assessment. There's nothing you can do really to be super confident unless you actually know what you're working against. So we always come in, suggest a risk assessment, and then we build a plan against that. Whatever you do, we recommend that. However you engage with AI, whatever you think your cyber risk is, always do a risk assessment. Third-party assessments carry weight for that reason. Not coming from the insurance space, but that's really true for anything.
Yeah, I'd say, look, like, it's just dovetailing off this conversation. I think, it's very clear there's difference of opinion in a lot of ways. And, we've had, direct conversations with the same kind of people, Fortune 100 companies that we've talked to the general counsel, and they don't think that there's cyber recovery, if any, or AI or digital labor across their company. And so I think as cyber insurance is a market that, right now we chose on purpose not to enter. And I think that's a conscientious decision. I think there needs to be this kind of tension, that really gets resolved through, specialist players that can go through, and we're not going to go through our entire architecture because that's obviously our core IP of how we're actually collecting information on on these exposures, but I think there really needs to be more specialists like ourselves that go in and basically collect this information, because, even if you do believe that it could be part of a multi-peril policy, I think you frankly don't want that. And we'll see that over time there.
Maybe I'll add to that from a governance perspective. And I think it kind of ties back to what you said. I think you're touching on definitions, because like once you put, agentic AI, what does that mean? Once you start defining risk categories, control mechanisms, and it's really exhaustive for types of AI, you can demystify what that risk is. And then as soon as definitions are, maturing, and it makes those kind of questions that you guys have this back and forth. You don't need to have those questions when the policies are maturing. And that's kind of where like Cernex comes in, that I represent, because we kind of look at all of these the regulatory frameworks, the EU AI Act, ISO 42001, ISO 27001, and there are about 50 relevant AI cybersecurity standards that you can pull from. And so there's no one size fits all. And that landscape is rapidly maturing, but also super far behind. And as you need experts to navigate that space, so you can at least know what questions to ask and start to put definitions on it. So if you don't know what you're working against, then it's hard to say you don't need help. You need to know the risk. If you don't know what the risk you don't know is, then what can you do? So I think that will become more clear as regulatory frameworks mature, but you can have groups like us kind of ushering your group into the age of AI.
Rich?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I'm just a stupid claims guy, so I'll put my underwriter hat on for a minute. But I think that, and again, everything I say is like cyber insurance, right? Because that's what I do. And the market's so soft, like there is, brokers and policyholders don't want to fill out a page ad, right? And so we have, us as an industry have had to navigate that over the past couple of years, even to the point of some companies doing, quote, click find, where you have like 5 questions. I'll offer you a quote and then you can bind it right there, because it's just easy to like, right? So I think with AI, like you might start seeing some additional questions from I'm sure, but it's not going to be as in depth as I think what a lot of it. Do you use agentic AI? You do. Do you have controls in place to make sure that they don't have elevated access or something? We do. Okay. Signed by the CFO or the CISO, and then there's
Kristen? I think you can boil that down to 2 questions. Is it what actions can this AI agent take, and what controls do you have in place to make sure it can't decide it wants more actions? There's a lot of nuance around that, but if the company has a clear definition of these are the powers the agent has, and we have some sort of system in place to prevent it from being assigned more powers, that's going to eliminate the majority of ways.
So we're winding up on the end of our time, and we've sort of touched on this, but I'm going to ask a question and we'll hopefully achieve some sort of quick fire moment, I guess, would be the thing. What does the industry need to do first? Julia?
Yeah, I would the group needs to come to consensus on definitions, regulatory landscapes as an industry. And while that's maturing, develop a plan of how you want to engage with AI. And then you need to assess the risks associated with that plan. And part of that will be cyber risks. Once you have that plan, assess the risk, then you can execute that plan. We'll live happily ever after.
Jeremy? Selfish plug, I think it needs more dedicated risk capital to this market. We just placed the first dedicated reinsurance treaty force for the liability, and I think there's going to be more to come. And I think that is probably one of the biggest issues is risk capital hasn't properly caught up to what on the ground risk is of these enterprises, because obviously coding has changed in the last several months. Yeah. And so I think that is clearly something that needs to catch up. And then on the other side of the table is obviously distribution needs to also be educated, because I think they are often having the same kind of conversations that are happening in silos around one product only. And we don't rock the boat because we don't need to have anyone take positions on this. So that's where we sit. We're here for clients, and we're here for actually pricing the risk that's on the ground for reinsurance. So kind of gives you like a
Rich?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, I'm going to talk about where I'm from, but I think the biggest risks with AI are really from cybersecurity or potential technology product issue. So make sure you have insurance from a reputable carrier if you're dealing with that. And I think everyone should have cyber insurance. If you're a business that uses computers, you should have cyber insurance. There's a lot of players in the marketplace that offer it regardless of your business vertical. And like I said before, I think generally the cyber insurance market on a monoline policy provides pretty expansive coverage for all perils, including AI. And then if you're leveraging AI specifically for your product or your service, your platform, then make sure you have technology, insurance. Talk to your broker and ask the question of, hey, if something happens here, am I covered for this? And make sure you get an answer to that moment.
Tristan?
Shift from a definition of bad to a definition of good. So don't try and list all of the ways someone can make a mistake with agentic AI and put in a questionnaire if they're doing these things. Have a definition of what you think is responsible use of AI. Have a tool, selfish plug, like Split Secure, that lets you monitor if the client is doing that. And then it's just one question. Are you following our recommended practices that let us understand and capture this risk in the policy line?
well said. Well said. Any last thoughts before we wrap up? Anyone?
Ready for another beer? Another White Claw?
I'll have one last thought. Several times in this panel, when talking about risk, I use the phrase unilateral power or unrestricted power. Adding a human as an intermediary between the AI and something sensitive can also be raping. If you give an AI model unrestricted admin access to, say, your AWS, it has the potential to delete your company off the internet. If an experienced IT admin can pump the brakes on that, can intercept key actions, now it's just your IT admin's assistant. I think this becomes much more manageable.
Well, let me go down the table.
Julia Garcia Tremblay with Cernex, thank you so much. Jeremy Epstein with Mayflower Specialty, thank you very much. Rich Gatz with Arch, thank you very much. And Tristan Mars to my right with Split Secure, thank you very much. I'm Martin Gittin, host of the Cyber Insurance News and Information Podcast. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. I probably should have said more at the beginning of, but I'm barely into this. Thanks very much for watching.